Hi folks, welcome to Man Cave. Hope everybody is keeping well. So if your Triumph Speed Twin 1200 is making this noise, stick around and hopefully I'll show you how to fix it. So having looked at the various Triumph internet forums out there, basically it would appear that that noise, which is only when you're coming to a rolling stop, sort of below 15 miles an hour with a little bit of light pressure on the front brake lever, it's caused by the back of the brake pads, the OEM brake pads, vibrating against the pistons in the brake caliper, causing that really annoying noise. It doesn't affect the brake performance, but it is a little bit frustrating when people start to look around at you as you come to a yellow line or come to a stop. So having looked at the internet forums, it would appear that the solution to all of these problems are to fit a set of these EBC brake pads into the calipers. So that's what we're going to do now. And it should hopefully take no more than 15 minutes aside. So tools for the job then. Obviously we need two sets of the EBC brakes. They are the double sintered pads. I'll put a link in the description down below. I got them from Demon Tweaks and they cost about £60 plus VAT and postage. We need a torque wrench, a socket wrench, a pair of gloves because brake dust and brake cleaner, it gets very mucky. A purple coloured Scotch pad or whatever, that's just to clean the rotors themselves. Then we need a 14mm socket, that's to undo the bolts, keeping the calipers onto the forks. Then a Torx T30, and that we're going to use just to remove the Torx bolt, which keeps the speed sensor on, the ABS sensor on. Then some copper grease, not imperative, some copper grease to put on the back of the pads, some brake cleaner of your choice, and we need to suspend the brake calipers up rather than have them dangling. So I've just got a whole bit of electrical wire there, and then quite a few cloths and a clean cloth just to clean the brake rotor at the end of it. So without further ado, let's crack on. So first things first, is a bit of a mucky job with the brake cleaner and the brake dust and everything. So I'm wearing my rubber gloves and I've got the back of the bike supported using my rear paddock stand. So what we're going to do then is with your 14mm socket, just undo the brake caliper bolts, just crack them off. 1, 2, and then do the same for the other side as well. And what we're going to do next is with a Torx T30 bit, and this is just on the left hand side, there isn't one of these on the right hand side. With the Torx T30 bit, just undo the speed sensor bolt. That's not done up very tight. I'll put all the torque settings on the screen when we come to put everything back. So one thing of note with this ABS sensor is when you come to put it back, when you put the Torx T30 bolt through the sensor, just make sure the washer goes on last. If you put the washer on first, as in, oops. So if you put the washer on this side and then put the bolt through the washer and then through the housing, then this male part here sits too close into the groove and you'll end up rubbing that on the ABS sensor ring. So I've put that Torx T30 bolt with the washer back into its hole so I don't lose it. And then I've now just got my, it's actually Cat 6 electrical cable that I've got. So around the top of the handlebar there. And then I'm just going to undo these bolts. So that's both bolts out now. And just basically slide carefully the caliper away. And you might just have to give a bit of a twist. Make sure you don't damage your wheels. And then pull them out. And then all you need to do is feed that through one of the holes, tie it up, and then that way you're not causing excessive pulling on your brake line. So the rear of the bike is on a paddock stand. It's not the end of the world if you haven't got one, and I've now put the front of the bike up on a front paddock stand because what we're going to do is decontaminate the front rotor. So I want to give the new EBC Sintered brake pads the best form of friction that I possibly can. So yeah, just going to give the rotors a clean. So we've got some old rags just around the wheel, and we're just going to spin the wheel, spray some of this stuff, brake cleaner on, and then use the purple Scotch pad just to decontaminate the rotor disc. If you haven't got one of those, not the end of the world. Just use a nice clean cloth and then rotate it frequently until it becomes nice and clean, and then that way you know you've got a really nice clean rotor both on the outside and the inside of the rotor disc. So let's clean it now. So just spraying lots of stuff on the disc. And obviously not forgetting to do the inside of the disc. And you might have to go around to the other side for that. So once you're happy that your rotor is nice and clean, either using one of these purple pads or something similar, and then with a clean cloth, just go around the rotor disc, turning the clean cloth every now and again until it becomes clean. So that is that brake rotor disc, nice and clean, free of all the contamination that may have been on there previously. And then all I'm going to do is just dry off the rest of the wheel to get rid of the brake cleaner, because it's not very nice stuff. So that's this rotor all nice and clear, and you do exactly the same for the other side. So now I'm just going to unclip the ABS wire from the brake line, just to make things a little bit easy. And here we have the brake caliper then. So what we need to do is you have these two retaining springs, shall we call them, and they just keep the pads in the brake caliper. So what we need to do is basically got to push with your thumb in and then pull the pin out. So you'll get there in the end. It does take a little bit of time. So there we go. So push the thumb in and then out comes the brake pin. And then that just releases the circlip or spring, whatever you want to call that. And then we'll do the same for the bottom one. And hopefully that will come out just as easy. And there we go. If it doesn't come out easy, just use a set of pliers to grab the head of that and just pull it out. And then again, just remove the retaining spring circlip. And then that gives us access to the pads. In fact, all we need to do is just pull the pads out. So I've got a cloth now, and what we're going to do is give the inside of the caliper a clean. But what you will also need is a toothbrush. I didn't mention that earlier on. So with a brake cleaner, just give it a bit of a blast. I have cleaned these previously, so they're not going to be that dirty. And then with a toothbrush, just work it in there until it is as clean as you can possibly get it. So that's the caliper then, nice and clean. And I'm just going to push the pistons back into the caliper, because obviously the new pads are thicker because they're newer than the ones we've just taken out, which are older. So it just makes it easier to fit this whole unit back over the disc. So here we are. This is a set of the new sintered pads from EBC, and this is one of the old original OEM pads, and it is a Brembo pad. And as you can see, we've got grooves down here, and the new ones haven't, and these are sintered and they are not sintered. And what we need to do now is put a little bit of copper grease on the back of these and then fit them into the caliper. So you don't need much, just where the piston comes into contact with the pad. Not much at all. You don't have to do it if you haven't got any of this copper grease. Don't worry about it. You can just put them in dry. So yeah, you don't need much. And that's it. We're going to put those back in the caliper. And it's also a good idea just to clean the pins and the circlips as well. Again, not imperative, but I've got some blue racing grease. I'm just going to smear onto the pins just to make it easier to get them in and to get them out, which is what I had on them before I took them out just now. But if you haven't got any grease, don't worry about it. Grease pins, clean circlips. Let's now put them back in the caliper. So clean caliper, we've got our new brake pads, just going to pop them into the caliper. You might just have to support it at the bottom of your finger and try not to touch the surface of the brake pad. So there we go. So the pads are nicely in there. And what we need to do now is take your retaining circlip and then pop it in there, and then we'll put the pin in. So what you have to do is push with your thumb down, and then take this is a bit of a faff this, take the newly greased pin, or not newly greased pin, and then push and then insert. So in goes the pin, and basically got to push it down, waggle the pin in, and sometimes you're lucky it'll go in first time, other time not, and you might just have to push it down a little bit. And there we go. So that now is nice and secure in there in the caliper. That's not going anywhere, with a nicely greased pin, and the same for the lower one as well. And voila, the bottom one is in as well. So just make sure the pins are in properly. That's the bottom one, that's the top one, yeah. There we go, and that caliper can now go onto the fork, and then we do exactly the same for the other side, but I'm not going to show you how to do that. But what we'll do now is reinstate the caliper onto the forks, torque them up, and we're good to go. So we're just going to take the caliper bolts out and then undo the speed sensor bolts out as well, and then just undo the caliper from the Cat 5 cable or Cat 6 cable. And I've actually taken my gloves off because it's just easier to fit the brake pads in there, and the pads and the calipers are really clean anyway, so I'm not going to get my hands too dirty now. So you might just have to pull the pads to the sides of the caliper and then basically just feed them over the disc with maybe a bit of a twisting action. But there we go, no, on first time, super job. And then just put the bolts in. So they're done up hand tight now, and then we'll just put the cable back onto the brake line, clip that back on, and then we've got the Torx T30 and the washer. So let's just take the washer off the Torx T30 and then pop the T30 into the male part on here, then put the washer on the underside here. If you don't put the washer on here, this male part will grind against the speed sensor disc, and then what we do is pop them in and then screw them up. But yeah, just make sure that washer goes on the correct way round, very important. And the next thing we need to do is just torque these bolts up to 28 Newton meters. 1, 2. As always folks, check with your owner's manual for the torque setting, but on my bike 2020 model, these are at 28 Newton meters, and the ABS Torx T30, I believe that's 9 Newton meters, but my torque wrench only goes down to 10, so rather than thread anything, I'm just going to do it up to what I think 9 Newton meters is, which is not a lot, so just be very gentle with this bottom one. Otherwise you're going to thread it, so I'm happy with that. But as you should always do is go for a ride and then check all the bolts etc that you have taken off and then refitted, just to make sure that they are still intact. So there we go, that's all fitted, and then we'll do the same for the other side, and then we are good to go. Well, that's it, we're nearly at the end of the video. It has taken me about 15 minutes just to fit the brake pads and clean the rotor on the right hand side of the bike, and then I've just put it back up onto the front paddock stand for where we are now. So a couple of things really, when you're working on your brakes, really contamination is the key, and cleanliness is also the big key factor as well. So clean your rotors, make sure they are nice and clean when you put brake pads in. That way you're getting the best friction between the new brake pads and the rotor disc as well. So the EBC HH Sintered brake pads from EBC, you can just have a look here. I just put them side by side, from the OEM Brembo brake pads to the new EBC brake pads, and I think you can just see that the sort of copper coloured backing plate that the braking material is attached to is significantly thinner than the Brembo OEM brake pad. So we've got a lot more braking meat on the new EBC brakes, and I'm led to believe they wear out a little bit quicker than the OEM brake pads. But if you've got any comments to make them in the comments section down below. And obviously when you now go for a ride on your bike, you've just got to readjust your brain, because the braking performance on the new EBC Sintered pads is going to be greater than the OEM Brembo brake pads. So just give yourselves a little bit of a while just to dial yourself into how the new brakes feel. And obviously you've got to bed the brakes in to the disc as well. So just take your time riding, don't sort of jump on the brakes straight away, and maybe go to the EBC website and just see what the braking period for the new brake pads is. And really the only thing to do is just make sure all your torque settings, as we said before, are still fine. You know, after a couple of rides, just make sure that everything's done up nicely. And then the only thing you need to do is, obviously when you're doing the brakes, try not to pull the brake lever, because you don't want the pistons popping out when the calipers are off the bike and there's no pads in the bike. So don't, you know, tell your kids and whatever not to pull the brake lever. And then obviously everything's now fitted, torqued down on the bike, and as you can see, look at that, doesn't it spin? Doesn't it spin really well? And that's because I've pushed the pistons back to fit the new EBC pads, so the pads aren't actually touching the disc. So if I went out now and wanted to apply the brakes, and the brake lever is going to come all the way back, and I guess I wouldn't stop. So before you go anywhere, give the front brake a pump so that the pads are then squeezed up against your disc. Otherwise, yeah, you may not be able to stop. So I'm just going to do that now before I forget. So just going to pump the front brake lever. Yep. And there we go. The pads are now resting against the rotor disc. And if I spin it, you should be able to hear them just scraping the disc. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so we've now got to go and bed those in and just get used to how the brake is going to feel with those new brakes. And hopefully I would have got rid of the squealing that I had when I rode it out of the showroom when I took possession of the bike 4 weeks ago. I don't think there's anything else to add. If I find anything else to add, I'll add it in the description box down below. In the meantime, make any comments, anything I've done wrong. As I say, I'm not a technician, so it's just a bit of a guide really. Ride safe, and I think my dogs are, yeah, my dogs seem to be quite happy. They're fast asleep. So ride safe, and we'll see you again soon in the next video. Cheerio for now.